Chers collègues, nous sommes le Subcommittee des droits internationaux de la personne du Comité permanent des affaires étrangères et du développement international.
And international development. This is meeting number 64. We are April 21st, 2015.
Continuing a study is the wrong way of putting it. We have had another hearing into the human rights situation in Vietnam. That was, unfortunately, a meeting which suffered from some technical difficulties with the audiovisual connections. It was most unfortunate. Today we have a second meeting, and with us today is Diem Do, who is the chairman of Viet Thanh. Welcome to our subcommittee. We're very glad to have you here. I'll invite you to begin your testimony. Once you've completed your testimony, we will then turn to the members of the subcommittee to ask you questions. The length of each round of questions and answers will be determined by how much time we have left. And I'm going to ask the members of the subcommittee, if any of them have to leave early because of the fact they have to go to a different building, please let me know, and we may adjust the order in which the questions are being asked and answered in order to allow ourselves a full amount of time while still making sure that everybody who has a question to ask gets the opportunity to do so. With that being said, Mr. Do, I turn the floor over to you, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of Parliament, and ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to thank the Subcommittee on International Human Rights for holding this meeting and for giving me the opportunity to speak about human rights situation in Vietnam. Now, at the end of the Vietnam War in 1975, Canada graciously received many Vietnamese refugees and provided them with a new home. And for this kindness and generosity, we would like to express our deepest gratitude to all of you. April 30th will mark the 40th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. We must examine how 40 years of communist rule has affected the people of Vietnam. Since 1975, the Communist Party of Vietnam established one of the most repressive and corrupt regimes in our history. Immediately after taking control of South Vietnam, the Communist Party sent hundreds of thousands of people into prison camps, where thousands died from torturing, starvation, diseases, and exhaustion from extreme labor. From 1975 and well into the 1990s, the reign of terror drove many people into a mass exodus from Vietnam. Of those who tried to escape by boat, many perished at sea or fell victim to pirates, including hundreds of women and young girls who were raped or kidnapped. But perhaps the most glaring aspect of their 40-year rule is their abysmal human rights record. And for today's meeting, I would like to offer my presentation on 5 key areas. First is freedom of expression and information. In Vietnam, the state controls all print and broadcast media. Foreign news and television shows are censored before they reach the Vietnamese audience. The government silences critics through police intimidation, harassment, arrest, court convictions, and severe prison sentences. According to Reporters Without Borders 2015 Press Freedom Index, Vietnam ranked 175th out of 180 countries. In September 2013, the government passed Decree 72, giving the state sweeping powers to restrict speech on internet blogs and social media. In January 2014, they passed Decree 174, putting in place harsh penalties for social media and internet users who voice, in quote, anti-state propaganda or reactionary ideologies. The government also uses DDoS attacks to shut down opposition websites, spyware and malware to hack into activist computers. According to Freedom House, they also employ thousands of public opinion shapers who spread favorable state propaganda on the internet. The top 2 recommendations for Vietnam from the UN Universal Periodic Review in February of last year were: number 1 is to create conditions favorable to the realization of freedom of opinion, expression, and association. And number 2, is to ensure that freedom of expression was protected both offline and online, and to enable unrestricted access and use of the Internet, and allow bloggers, journalists, and other Internet users and NGOs to promote and protect human rights. Second area is to freedom of assembly and association. The government of Vietnam bans all political parties, labor unions, and human rights organizations independent of the government or the Communist Party. The authorities require official approval for public gatherings and refuse to grant permission for meetings, marches, or protests they deem unacceptable. In recent years, numerous protests broke out over land confiscation by corrupt officials, over poor labor conditions and inadequate labor policy, and over territorial disputes with China. Now, in response, state security forces regularly crack down on people participating in these protests, and many activists were either detained or sentenced up to 7 years in prison. Third area is freedom of religion or belief. Although religious freedom is protected under the Vietnamese Constitution, however, there are many related decrees placing significant limitation on religious freedom. Most recently, Decree 92 was passed in January 2013, further extending government's control on religious groups. All religious groups in Vietnam are required to join a party-controlled organization called Vietnam Fatherland Front. Those who fail to do so are often arrested or harassed. Religious groups most often targeted by the government include the Cao Dai Church, the Hoa Ha Buddhist Church, independent Protestant house churches, the Catholic Redemptorist, and the Unified Buddhist Church of Vietnam. Vietnam's current situation can be best captured in the report of the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief after his visit to Vietnam in July of last year. Mr. Heiner Bielefeld wrote in his summary that whereas religious life and religious diversity are a reality in Vietnam today, autonomy and activities of independent religious or belief communities, that is, unrecognized communities, remain restricted and unsafe, with the rights to freedom of religion or belief of such communities grossly violated in the face of constant surveillance, intimidation, harassment, and persecution. Area number 4 is political rights. Vietnam is a one-party state in which the Communist Party of Vietnam has a firm monopoly over political power. This monopoly is guaranteed in Article 4 of the recently amended 2013 Constitution, which states that the Communist Party of Vietnam is the sole force leading the state and society. As mentioned above, all opposition parties are banned and severely persecuted. Members of the Vietnam National Assembly, which is their legislature, are elected in general elections. However, all candidates are vetted by the CPV, or the Communist Party's controlled Vietnam Fatherland Front. And this earned Vietnam a Freedom House 2015 political rights score of 7, with 1 being the best and 7 being the worst. And as a result, the party controls all branches of the government, and according to Freedom House, party membership is widely viewed as a means to business and societal connections, and corruption and nepotism among party members are a continuing problem. And in Transparency International 2014 Corruption Perception Index, Vietnam ranked 119th out of 175. And despite many challenges, human rights defenders, democracy activists, intellectuals, and even recently, increasingly, some former high-ranking communist officials have openly called for political reform and better respect for human rights. Still, the government responded with more arrest, harassment, and intimidation, a repression that many international organizations label as the worst over the last 20 years. Fifth and last area is the rule of law. Instead of the rule of law, the Vietnamese government has relied on the rule by law approach, applying sweeping national security provision to suppress basic rights. To curtail freedom of speech, activists are charged with vaguely worded articles in the Penal Code, such as Article 88, conducting propaganda against the state. Article 79, subversion of the People's Administration, and Article 258, misuse of democratic freedom to attack state interests and the legitimate rights and interests of organization or citizens. In addition, Vietnam's judiciary is under the control of the Communist Party, and in politically motivated cases, trials are often conducted hastily and routinely lack the impartiality required by international law. Vietnamese law also authorized administrative detention without trial, deeming peaceful dissidents as a threat to national security and placing many under house arrest. To avoid international criticism, authorities have sometimes applied non-political charges, such as tax evasion, to jail high-profile activists. As an example, in the 2014 Human Rights and Democracy Report, the United Kingdom Foreign and Commonwealth Office classified Vietnam as a country of concern, with the following observation. There is a lack of transparency and accountability throughout the legal system. We are concerned that the state uses the courts to punish dissidents by prosecuting them on unrelated matters. For example, in the case of Lê Quốc Quân, whose sentence to 30 months in prison for tax evasion was upheld in February 2014. The UK assessed that he was imprisoned for voicing his opinions on religion, corruption, and land reform, and that his trial was unfair. In conclusion, to protect human rights and ultimately to support democracy in Vietnam, I would like to make the following 4 recommendations. Number 1 is to call for political prisoners' releases. I urge that the Government of Canada joins the UN 2014 Universal Periodic Review in calling on the Vietnamese government to immediately release all political prisoners held and those held for peaceful expression or religious beliefs. It is estimated that there are currently hundreds of political prisoners in Vietnam. Second recommendation is to outreach to civil society. The Canadian Embassy in Vietnam should meet with and support independent grassroots organizations, especially those advocating for social reform, legal reform, and human rights. In addition, engaging with human rights defenders and the relatives of those in prison would be very helpful. 3 is focus on legal reform. The Government of Canada can insist that the Government of Vietnam abolish Articles 79, 88, and 258 of the Penal Code and Administrative Decrees 72, 92, and 174. Canadian Embassy officials should request to attend political trials and insist that the Government of Vietnam respect the right to assemble, to exercise free speech, and to form civic organizations. 4th and last recommendation is to integrate human rights into the overall bilateral relationship. The Government of Canada can incorporate legal reform and internet freedom into the agenda for promoting higher education and trade with Vietnam. Develop a roadmap linking human rights improvements with closer economic and security ties, and continue to raise human rights during all parliamentary and executive branch visits to Vietnam. Ladies and gentlemen, for many years, the international community, especially the Canadian government and people, have been supporting human rights in Vietnam. And we thank you for all you have done. We believe that a free and democratic Vietnam, where human rights are respected, is in the best interests of the Asia-Pacific region and beyond. We ask for your support in bringing human rights and freedom to our country so that Vietnam can become a reliable and strong partner for a safe and prosperous Southeast Asia. Thank you again for having me here today.
Thank you for your testimony. Colleagues, that was done in such a timely fashion, thank you, Sonia, we have more time than we have at some previous meetings for each round of questions. I think we can get away with 7-minute rounds of questions and answers, and we'll start with Ms. Graywall.
Thank you, Chair, and Mr. Doe, thank you very much for your testimony today and for very concrete recommendations to the subcommittee as to how we should proceed. The Vietnamese government continues to be a violator of a broad array of human rights and is among the worst violators of religious freedom in the world. The international community must exert pressure on the Vietnamese government to cease these abuses against its own citizens. So I'm particularly concerned about the trafficking of women, men, and children around the region. It is my understanding that women are sold as mail order brides or surrogate mothers, and men are often sold into indentured servitude, and the worst, vulnerable citizens, children, are exploited for the purposes of sex, labor, and forced begging, or bonded labor. Could you provide our committee with an additional information about human trafficking?
Yes, it is a huge problem in Vietnam. Part of the reason is because a lot of these trafficking ring actually either sponsor or under the protection of the police. And as you may have guessed, being a very corrupt system, the police, local officials are very much involved in all this trafficking activity. As far as I know, the number of women who have been trafficked throughout Southeast Asia are numbered into the hundreds of thousands. In Taiwan, China, Hong Kong area alone, we're talking about approximately anywhere between 70 to 85,000 women. I visited South Korea actually 2 years ago, and met with some of these women who were trafficked and rescued. And the estimate by the South Korean government is anywhere between 45 to 50,000 women trafficked from Vietnam into South Korea. So it is a huge problem. We've been trying to work with many international NGOs to address the issue. However, it's hard to deal with this problem because it's originated from Vietnam, and like I said, at times under the protection of the police and local government official. So it's very hard to put an end to this problem because it's, if we don't have the cooperation of the government of Vietnam, then it's very hard to deal with. Now, as far as children is concerned, I'm not as familiar. However, I am very familiar with children trafficking to neighboring country, like especially to Cambodia. I don't have a lot of information about children being trafficked elsewhere, but in Cambodia, I do have quite familiarity with the area. And it is approximately, it has been estimated that there are about 30 to 35,000 children from Vietnam currently residing in Cambodia and mostly being exploited as prostitutes. And I had actually met with a few of them. The youngest, 6 years old. The oldest, 14. Mostly girls, but a lot of boys too. It's heartbreaking. It's truly heartbreaking to see that firsthand. I have worked with a couple groups trying to get help to some of these kids. But then again, the problem originated in Vietnam. And if we cannot get any cooperation from the Vietnamese government, then it's become very difficult.
Well, I'm also really troubled by the persecution of religious minorities across Vietnam, government seizure of lands, particularly those belonging to religious or other minority groups, the resale of lands belonging to churches and temples, and the infiltration of religious organization by government agents. They demonstrate a contempt of religious freedom. So people should be able to practice their beliefs without fear of punishment or persecution by government officials. So in terms of the religious persecution, is it all kind of religions or is it a particular religion that is singled out as well? Is it possible religion is just an kind of an excuse for political persecution? Could you please put light on that?
Right. Well, first of all, I have to say the Vietnamese government, they do not discriminate when it comes to persecution. Mm-hmm. They don't. They persecute equally across the board, whether you are Buddhists, Catholics, Mennonite, Protestants, doesn't matter. They prosecute these groups simply because if these groups do not agree to their control or do not subject themselves to their control, then that's trouble for these groups. As I mentioned in my testimony, religious groups in Vietnam are required to join and be put under the control of the Vietnam Fatherland Front, which is basically a tool controlled by the Communist Party. And if these groups refuse to join, refuse to obey by their rule, then that's trouble, and they prosecute these groups because of that. Case in point, in fact, just last night, I spoke to a Mennonite pastor in Vietnam, and he shared with me that he was roughed up by so-called thugs, and when he filed a complaint with the police did absolutely nothing. Now, whether these thugs were actually hired by the police or not, it's we can all assume that it's because it is a common occurrence in Vietnam that police actually hire thugs to do the dirty work for them, to harass people, to beat up people. So, to sum up, prosecution because they want to control, and if you don't subject your group to their control, then they will not allow that.
I'm afraid that's all the time we've got, Ms. Kirwall.
Yeah.
We'll go now to Mr. Marston.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Doe, I want to commend you for the comprehensive testimony. You have condensed into a very small area some significant issues for us to consider. Listening to you talk about the trafficking in children, being a grandfather with 9 grandchildren, and you could imagine for a moment where my imagination took me and the horribleness of this. But you spoke several times in your testimony about police corruption. One of the things I didn't hear in your testimony is how is that police corruption connected to the national government, or is there a space between them? When you have a national government that is supportive to those kinds of actions, it makes it very difficult because clearly they don't have a conscience at that point. Is there an opening there for us to address this issue through their national government?
Thank you. Corruption is a national problem for our country. It is all the way to the top. It's not just a few bad apples in the security forces. It is a huge problem. It runs all the way to the top. It's common knowledge in Vietnam right now. All the top leaders are very corrupt. Their families, their children, their wives, their cronies. They build them around themselves circle of supporters who they basically benefit from their position. Thanks to the recent infighting within the top leaderships, news and information have been leaked out to the extent of corruption by the president, by the party chief, by the prime minister. They even document or showcase pictures of their lavish lifestyle for everybody to see. So I think the problem is not at the local level. It's all the way to the top, all the way down.
Well, again, beyond your testimony, the facts that you've given us in the brief you've left us, we would sit here as parliamentarians with the Canadian government thinking in terms of where Canada could best intervene. And as you know, Canada's part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations that are going on right now, and so is Vietnam. I would say that neither party is actually the core of those negotiations because of who else is involved. But it strikes me that that's a particular avenue of at least sidebarring and addressing some of these issues and highlighting the fact that we need to have, as part of any agreement, that we have human rights written into the agreement, that labor rights are written into the agreement. We've expressed concerns over the last number of years of the agreements Canada's entered into that hasn't happened. Do you have any particular measures you think should be reflected in that Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement when it comes forward?
I think you mentioned labor rights. I think the TPP would be a great venue to push forward issues about labor rights. Also, issues about human rights wherever appropriate. An issue of legal reform. It's hard to do business with a country where the legal system is so corrupt and so convoluted and up for interpretation by whichever ways the government wants. So a legal reform, labor rights, and human rights, I think those are the three key areas that I think would benefit greatly if we can use the TPP as a venue to push us forward.
The other area of concern is the drug detention centers. We have seen in some countries that the so-called war on drugs was actually used by totalitarian-type governments to persecute their own people and mistreat them in many and actually kill them in many instances. Do you have any information regarding the treatment of detainees in these centers?
Generally speaking, treatment of detainees or prisoners in the Vietnamese prison system is very poor. I have done some work with a number of activists inside Vietnam who are trying to compile a report on prison condition in Vietnam, not just political prisoners, everybody. How poor and how inhumane the prison system in Vietnam is right now. So I'm hoping that once we have that report compiled, perhaps as a follow-up, we can share with the subcommittee as to the findings of that report. But as I said, generally speaking, prison condition in Vietnam is very poor. Now, especially political prisoners or prisoners of conscience, they are frequently subjected to mistreatment, denial of needed medical attention, torturing, and the government even employ the tactic of putting these political prisoners in the same cell with HIV-infected people. And that's the kind of treatment that these prisoners of conscience are subjected to.
How's my time, Mr. Chair? Perfect. One of the areas that you implied or were actually fairly direct on is the corruption throughout the system. And you alluded to judges. Would you say it's 100% the judges are under the thumb of this government and are not having any latitude in their decision making? An example would be if they're repressing the media, if they're repressing bloggers, are they using the judges themselves as tools to do that, or just the system in general?
Yes, the judges are appointed by the government. They are under government's control. I have yet to see any judge in Vietnam deviate from what they are told to do.
Yeah, I was hoping for something a little better than that. When you lose your judiciary in any country, the rule of law, then it's an open market for people who want to violate accepted laws, even though you may have a statute that limits what they're supposed to do and that the judges are supposed to enforce. But as I believe you said in your testimony, they kind of look which way the wind is blowing and match up their rulings relative to that, which then sets jurisprudence in place that can be used for further abuses later on.
If I may, just 30 seconds. Political trials in Vietnam, the sentences are already predetermined. The judge basically just reads the sentence that was handed to them. They really don't make any ruling. They don't. Mm-hmm. And that's the reality.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Marsden. Is it Mr. Hillier? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
Is the Vietnam government, is it propped up by any other government like China? Is it pretty much fully independent?
The Vietnamese communists and the Chinese communists are in a love-hate relationship. The Vietnamese communists know that they need patronage from the Chinese Communist Party to stay alive. And at the same time, they also know that the Vietnamese people resent that greatly. And so they try to walk a fine line and tiptoeing But to make a long story short, yes, they are under heavy influence from China. But however, on the surface, they would try their very best to put on a good face that no, they're not under the control of China.
Okay, and how much influence do they have on the neighboring countries? After the Vietnam War, around this time of the Vietnam War, it seemed like a lot of the countries in the area were falling under communist regime, and a lot of them were not independent of each other. How is that today? Is the surrounding countries influenced by Vietnam?
I would say immediately after the end of the war, Vietnam, the Vietnamese Communist Party they did enjoy for a long period of time much influence, if not control, over Laos, the two neighboring countries, Laos and Cambodia. But by my assessment, Cambodia is slipping away from their control. Laos is still pretty much heavily influenced by the Vietnamese government. Now, why? I think part of the reason is because China is also they have been investing a lot in Cambodia, and the Chinese influence in Cambodia, I noticed that had been growing significantly, and that could be part of the reason why it's being pulled away gradually from Vietnam. Vietnamese presence in business, workers, and Vietnamese influence over the Cambodian society, I noticed over the last 5 to 10 years, had dramatically declined. But not so much in Laos.
While Cambodia is getting some independence, is it also becoming more free and more respectful of human rights? Or
well, I'm not sure how would we classify Mr. Hun Sen's government, but at least at the ground level, the people of Cambodia enjoy more freedom than the people of Vietnam. By all means, I think by traditional Western democratic standard, I think the current Cambodian government doesn't really quite measure up. However, if you, relatively speaking, compare the two society, I'm sad to say that, and happy for the Cambodian people, and I'm sad for the Vietnamese people that we do not have the same kind of leeway or flexibility as the Cambodian people is enjoying right now.
The reason I'm asking about the neighboring countries, you also talked about South Korea being a destination for a lot of the human trafficking. And as difficult as it may be to address some of these issues in Vietnam itself, how much can be done through working with neighboring countries?
I have to say the Taiwanese government and the South Korean government have been very supportive. I do not myself work directly on these issues, but I have associates, and I know groups who work on these issues. And in my communication with them, they do enjoy quite a bit of support from the Taiwanese government and the South Korean government on this issue. I have to say that. Now, for cases in China or Hong Kong, as you may have guessed, we really don't have much. We really don't have much of the ability to penetrate into that particular area to resolve the issue. So we basically contain our activities in Taiwan and South Korea at this point.
Should we be putting it? You gave us 4 recommendations for how we can respond or work with the Vietnamese government itself, but how much effort should we be putting on countries like Cambodia or even China to bear some influence on the Vietnamese government?
I think, for example, in Cambodia, the issue of children trafficking, I think will go a long way if the government of Canada will address the issue of children trafficking through Cambodia, whether it's from Vietnam or any countries. Because by my experience, I have seen the problem there. Now, same thing goes for other countries. If we can lend a helping hand in dealing with this issue or assisting them in any way, I think that would probably be very much appreciated. But then again, as I said, the Taiwanese government and the South Korean government have been very supportive. They are aware of the problem, and they do sense that they want to help to deal with this.
What about not just in regards to the trafficking, but in regards to diplomatic pressure on the government for human rights improvements in general? Is it better to just put all of our efforts into encouraging the Vietnamese government, or should we also get the other countries or surrounding countries on board with us?
I think we hope. My viewpoint is that we probably should be focusing our attention more on the Vietnamese government. I was just here in Ottawa 6 months ago in November, and I had a chance to meet with a number of members of parliament and discuss the prospect for change in Vietnam. I want to sidetrack just 1 minute. This is the first time in a long time where we actually see a real chance for change coming to Vietnam. So this is the window of opportunity that I see, that if we exert more human rights issue on the Vietnamese, human rights pressure on the Vietnamese government, I think we'll go a long way to bring about at least some changes and push the government further down the track of positive change.
Why is the window now?
Because they are experiencing unprecedented problems and pressure, both externally and internally. Compared to 20 years ago, 15 years ago, even 10 years ago, their control over the Vietnamese society is cracking. It's cracking. The fact that they unleashed one of the worst crackdown over the last 20 years is a sure sign that they are being cornered, and they have to react. They have to retaliate. And the encouraging thing is that despite being the worst crackdown over the last 20 years, the number of activists in Vietnam right now is, we have the more people ever compared to years ago being involved. More protests ever. People are being less afraid to speak out. People are pushing back. Just a couple of weeks ago, we have a massive labor strike and walkout in Vietnam. 90,000 workers walk off the job. First time ever. People are pushing back. And we can clearly see that if you compare now, 2015 to 2005, it's clear. They are being pushed back, and they are retreating.
Thank you. Let's go to our next round. Professor Kotler, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin by commending our witness really on the well-organized testimony regarding human rights violations in Vietnam and the specific recommendations that you've offered us. I also want to commend the excellent work of the Vietnam International Coalition. I've had the pleasure of meeting with you and members of your group, and we've been the beneficiary of your work. And I also take this opportunity to express appreciation for the large number of members of the Vietnamese Canadian community who are here today and their supporters to see this kind of engagement in the parliamentary system is really very encouraging. Your testimony included express reference to what might be called the criminalization of fundamental freedoms in Vietnam, freedom of expression, assembly, association, religion, political advocacy, and like very much the fundamental freedoms in our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, I might add parenthetically. And there has been, I noticed, an increasing arrest and prosecution and imprisonment of lawyers who've been acting, let's say, on behalf of human rights defenders in recent years. My questions are, I'll put them all together and you can answer them either sequentially or together. Why is this happening? Or is it the case that lawyers are in fact being singled out for their human rights advocacy? Can international advocacy by parliamentarians or otherwise help in terms of the plight of these human rights lawyers, and if you have any suggestions in that regard? And given the fact that Vietnam is, as you've described it, a one-party state, and given the corruption of the legal system, can these lawyers have any effect within Vietnam, given the context?
By my own experience, and as far as I know, for a country of 90 million people, we have a total of 5 practicing human rights lawyers. And these 5 are constantly harassed, intimidated by the government. And I'm afraid if this keep on going, we soon will have probably 4, 3, 2, and who knows when we're going to have 0. And these 5 brave individuals, and I did have the opportunity to at least communicate with some of them in the past to see and understand how difficult life can be for them. So why? Because I think 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, there's no such thing as human rights lawyers in Vietnam. But in recent years, we begin to see people who are willing to take on these cases because, again, we can see that over the last 10 years, the control of the Vietnamese government over society is cracking. And as more and more people are challenging the government, as more and more people being brought to trials, there's a need for some lawyers to speak out to defend these people. And because of that need, we begin to see people come out and take on these cases. Now, a few years back, we had more than 5, but now we dropped down to 5. And the government know that, one of the way to discourage people to take these cases to court, one of the ways to silence people is to put pressure on these human rights lawyers so that they will not take on these cases anymore. And these people will go to trials with no legal representation, none whatsoever.
Are there specific ways in which we might be able to support those human rights lawyers and thereby protect them, if you will, against the oppression of the Communist Party in the
There are a number of ways. For those human rights lawyers who have their license stripped from them, and there are about 3 or 4 that I can name, we can put pressure. They have their license to practice be put back in effect. We can push the Vietnamese government on legal reform, legal proceedings. Lawyers sometimes are given a day notice of the trial, sometimes half a day notice. You cannot prepare for a trial if you are given only a day or half a day. We can push them for legal reform in the sense that lawyers should be granted access to their clients while their clients are being detained. It's very common in Vietnam that these lawyers are denied access to their clients. So legal reform is the second way. First one is to make sure that these people get the protection that they need, and those who get their license taken away be reinstituted. Legal reforms for changes is the second approach.
What about the judiciary? Is there any semblance of any independent judiciary in Vietnam?
I'm sad to say that I have yet to see any glimmers of hope. The judiciary system is completely under the control of the Communist Party. All judges are appointed, and they are governed. They are under the direction of the government. And as I mentioned, in the overwhelming majority of political cases, all of the sentences were already predetermined. The judge was just there to keep order in the court, basically. It's not uncommon to see political case trials while the witness was standing there and trying to plead their case, the judge would be pouring tea, chit-chatting and drinking tea, as if they don't care. They don't listen. It's captured on video. You can go on YouTube. You can see for yourself. So these political trials, judges just chit-chatting. They don't even pay attention. So I have yet to see any glimmer of hopes yet.
One last quick question. Has your organization met with or made any representations, for example, to the International Bar Association, which could be a kind of advocacy group on behalf of the human rights lawyers in Vietnam?
Yes, we are trying to work with, we are currently working with International Bar Association. We work with Legal Defense. We work with Lawyers Without Borders. We work with those groups. We try to have these human rights lawyers, the very few, precious few, be brought out for legal training so that they can hone up their skills. So those are the kind of things we have been trying to do, and we still continue doing it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kotler. Going back to the government side, are we going to Mr. Sweet now?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to mention 3 quick things. One, we have quite a high-profile gentleman named Tom Campbell, who was one of the those who came over from Vietnam in a boat years ago, and has written a book and is making very public the plight of Vietnamese today. Also, we have a champion in Hamilton, Reverend John Smith, who was part of working, really leading the group that brought many of the Vietnamese here when they were evacuating Vietnam, and are now living here with very successful lives. And just want to echo the comments of my colleague, Professor Kotler, that very impressed. I think this is probably the largest diaspora that we've seen at a committee meeting. So it represents the dedication that you have for your brothers and sisters back home, and to bring a greater level of independence and freedom for them. So commendations to you. You had mentioned to my colleague about the patronage that the government wants to get from China, but you're also talking about the corruption that's endemic in this Communist Party. Do you sense, along with the other movement that you're talking about, some kind of crackdown from the Chinese? They're going through their own purge in Beijing from the fact that they understand how difficult it is to try and retain power if the people see that there's open corruption. You sense any positive movement in that regard?
Well, the Vietnamese government have tried numerous times over the last 10, 15 years. They launched one campaign, anti-corruption campaign after another. But pretty quickly people realize that these are just gimmick, because one campaign after another has not produced any concrete results. And the problems keep getting worse and worse and worse. So, again, there's no positive development yet. The government's still talking about anti-corruption, and believe me, they will have one more campaign. I'm not surprised, but whether it's going to get anything done or not is different.
Well, in their case, it's just window dressing, but
exactly.
No serious movement on any of the players that have been fomenting the corruption. Okay. The last number that I've been able to see is around 200 political prisoners behind bars in Vietnam. Do you have an exact number, and is your group documenting? Are you able to document the names of the individuals who are in prison?
Yes, we can supplement the subcommittee with the list of prisoners that we have. You're right. Most international organizations put the numbers around 200. I believe Human Rights Watch and Freedom House both put the numbers in Vietnam about 200. The problem is the real number is going to be higher, because, as I mentioned, administrative detention, a lot of people are being held without trials, with no formal court conviction, and yet they are being held. So the real number is going to be higher, but we'll do our best to supplement the subcommittee with the list that we have.
And any access, NGOs, the Red Cross, Amnesty International, any access to these prisoners at all to bring out reports about how they are?
It's really hit or miss. Human Rights Watch tried to access some of these people. Amnesty International.
As recently as when?
Probably like maybe a year ago.
Okay.
I believe the last time there was some effort to access these people was like a year ago. Now, embassy in Hanoi tried to do so as well. The German embassy, the American embassy, the Swedish had tried very hard to access these people over the years as well. So not just NGOs, but some embassies have done their part. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'll come back to that in a second. There's another question that I wanted to ask you. Is there still a large migration out of Vietnam? Or is the Communist Party preventing that as well?
There has been still people trickling out. In fact, I was just over in Australia last month, and there are right now in Australia, if I'm not mistaken, more than 1,000 Vietnamese refugees waiting for asylum.
And are they being processed by the UNHCR?
I'm sorry?
Are they being processed by the UNHCR?
I believe so. In Thailand, there are hundreds, if not close to 1,000 Vietnamese refugees seeking political asylum in Thailand. So, yes, people are still trying to leave Vietnam. Not as large of a scale like during the 80s and 90s, but there are still people trying to leave Vietnam as of today.
And they would in Thailand they would be intermingled with Burmese as well, and
right.
And
they are being handled by the UN HCR.
Yes, yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We turn now to Mr. Benskin, please.
Thank you, and echo the comments of my colleagues, and one, welcoming you here, and welcoming the significant contingent of the Vietnamese community or Vietnamese Canadian community here today. I'm going to follow up a bit on what my colleague, Mr. Sweet, had touched on, the NGOs.
Yes.
In previous testimony, we heard that, correct me if I'm wrong, I understand that the NGOs that have managed to sort of exist in Vietnam were NGOs that were created by the government to sort of show that they're allowing accessibility on the ground. Is this correct? First off?
I think one of the positive trend in Vietnam right now is the development of a nascent civil society. And we begin to see in recent years more and more grassroots organization start to spring up and operate inside Vietnam. And also NGO from the outside coming in, established operation inside Vietnam. So that's a positive trend. However, the overwhelming majority of these groups are still working on issues that's non-threatening to the government. If you work on the environment, poverty reduction, literacy, HIV prevention, great. They are welcome to operate. But if they touch on issues like religious freedom, they touch on issues of sensitive issues, then that's where trouble begins.
Okay, and so the accessibility, first off, of outside NGOs in terms of any organizations that is looking to help generate political action, grassroots political action in terms of political reform, these types of agencies, they don't have access, or are they beginning to have access, or is the government too repressive that they cannot even get off the ground?
I want to use one example. I understand that the Swedish government and Swedish NGO have been pushing forward with legal reform in Vietnam for quite some time, and there are projects and NGOs, Swedish NGOs operating in Vietnam, working on legal reforms, and the government will allow that to a certain extent. They can push, but if there's a limit, if you cross that limit, then that's trouble. So to sum up, I think the government of Vietnam today they're smart enough to know that they need to put on at least the best face, and they will allow certain activities, as long as those activities do not cross a line that they draw. And if you cross the line, then you have to close up shop and leave.
We're also hearing testimony on the issues, the human rights issues, due to the political situation in North Korea, for example. And one of the things that has been mentioned numerous times is getting information to the people. In North Korea, information is trickling in on thumb drives and things of this nature to the people, and it's building that encouragement. We've talked about you've talked about the sort of the trade end of discussions in terms of attaching human rights issues to trade agreements, which we agree with 100%. How would we get how do we get sort of alternative information to the people? You mentioned that the government has clamped down on bloggers and internet access, that type of thing. How would we get information to the people for them to be able to use
the internet? In fact, part of the reason why the situation in Vietnam has been changing over the last 10 years is because of the proliferation of internet use in Vietnam. Right now in Vietnam, there are out of 90 million people, there are about 40 million internet users, people who have access to the internet. 25 million people having a Facebook account. That's a very high number for a country like Vietnam. And the government have been trying, and still trying to exert control over the internet. Back in 2009, they actually shut down Facebook for a few months. But then when the young people protested so much, they had to bring it back up again. So the internet is still a powerful tool for us to get information into Vietnam. Of course, they put up firewall. They try to, put different kind of blocks. But if there's a block, people will find a way to circumvent. And people have been circumventing. And because of the internet, information has been getting out there. People have access to information through non-traditional channels. In my testimony, I did make a recommendation about pushing forward to guarantee internet freedom in Vietnam, to support internet freedom in Vietnam, to pressure the government to respect the internet freedom in Vietnam. I think would go a long way in helping getting information out.
And
I've got another minute.
okay, in terms of the diaspora here, and as we've mentioned, the diaspora is represented quite strongly here. The kind of work that they are able to do in order to help bring about change and reform in Vietnam, how can that be supported? And I guess sort of an question to that would be, or additional question to that would be, is there any threat to family members with people from the diaspora working actively to make reform in Vietnam?
Yes. People who are active over here would very quite often find themselves being denied visa to enter Vietnam. Numerous cases, people, even after getting a visa to enter Vietnam, we get stopped at the airport and get sent back out right away, numerous times. I can cite you numerous cases of people who are active out here and going back for a family visit, or whether their mother or father passed away, going back for a funeral, get picked up by the police, questioned, held for a few days, get deported. Very common. So Vietnamese Canadian or Vietnamese American or Vietnamese German, we all experience that. If we are vocal, you are active, you will experience that kind of treatment from the Vietnamese government. And in many cases, their family in Vietnam also gets into trouble, questioned, harassed by the police. So it's very common.
Thank you. A lot of information. Thanks very much for a very succinct but fulsome presentation, and I'm good.
Thank you, Mr. Benskin. Ms. Graywall signaled to me that she had an additional question. Is it acceptable to the committee for her to place that question? Okay, go ahead, Ms. Graywall.
Thank you, Chair, and it's a very small question. Well, is the government of Vietnam sensitive kind of to the actions we would take here in Canada with respect to human rights?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again?
Is the government of Vietnam sensitive to the actions we would take here in Canada with respect to human rights?
And I would say yes. The Vietnamese government, generally speaking, they are very sensitive to international pressure. They are. They recognize that they have a need to integrate with the world economically, security-wise as well. So they are very, very much sensitive. And if we keep pushing and pushing, keep exerting pressure whenever we can, I think it would definitely help, and it has been helping. Imagine if there's no pressure, none whatsoever, things will be 10 times worse, if not 100 times worse in Vietnam. So yes, we need that very much. Yeah.
Thank you. So thank you very much. I wanted to ask Mr. Do, before you leave, you mentioned sending us an updated list of prisoners of conscience.
Yes.
If you could pass that on to our clerk, he'll make sure to distribute it to all the members. And just to be clear about this, there's an open line of communication. You need not send only one list. If you find that you require further updates, if information changes, you can send that along as well, and it will continue to be distributed to all members.
Yes.
Thank you very much for coming today. Thank you for bringing such a large representation from the diaspora community. We're very grateful that you could bring this important matter to the subcommittee's attention today.
Thank you for having me here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Colleagues, we are dismissed.